Yeah, so welcome all of you. A lot of you are used to seeing me and in lectures, but generally in the black T-shirt. So for a change, I think it's very different experience for all of you to see me in a probably a different color T-shirt today, right? Right. So first of all, thank you so much, Avinash sir, and all the team at Disha Publication for inviting me for this webinar. And I'm really glad to be sharing this space among the illustrious authors of Disha Publication. So a very warm welcome to all of you. And without further ado, we'll quickly jump into the topic. So as you know that I'm coming up with this new book on international relations. By the way, I can't hear anything if you say because I've muted the speaker. Only my mic is on. I can only see your comments, in the comment section. जिनको आवाज नहीं आ रही है kindly just refresh it once. I think the audio is working fine, right? So let me know if in case the audio is not working, I'll get a message automatically from the team. So as you know, this international relation has been a topic of my interest from very long time, and there have been a lot of instances where a lot of you have yourself requested me, so that I should come up with a topic or a course on international relations. I had somehow refrained from picking it up because that is an area of deep expertise of mine, deep interest of mine, and I've always tried to limit myself to the topics of international relations. But generally, otherwise, it has been an area of keen interest for me. So finally, we have a book here which goes through the entire process of international relations. So finally, I think this is a demand which has been a long-term demand from all of you. तो वो demand एक तरीके से आप लोग की complete हो रही है by this book. So I'm really glad for that. So the topic of today is evolving global geopolitics. So we'll be quickly going through some brief idea about geopolitics. What is geopolitics? And I'll just give you a brief idea about that. And then we'll see how the global diplomacy is being shaped, especially in the terms of COVID and COVID-19, and also the climate change that has been going on from a very long time. Right, so let me just share my PPT and then we'll start off with the session. Just give me a second. All right, so global geopolitics. So this geopolitics is a very tricky term. This word geopolitics has, basically come from the Greek word geopolitics. But before that, I just want to give you a brief background about myself. क्योंकि काफी सारे इसमें जो participants हैं, they are fairly new. And बहुत सारे लोग तो मुझे पहले से जानते हैं, but a lot of amongst you who are watching this webinar are fairly new to the whole process. So I'll just give you a brief background about myself. So I am the author of this upcoming book by Disha Publications, International Relations Redefined, Interests and Challenges. And in this book, the effort has been to discuss international relations from the beginning, since the inception, where the modern the geopolitics has started. From the historical times, with discussion about theories of geopolitics, along with how it has evolved over a period of time, and of course how the relations are with respect to India. Because we as Indians, our main concern should be what is in it for India rather than what is in it for other countries. So as an Indian citizen, the core area of focus for us is that how is India's relationship changing with other countries of the world, and how it has created an impact in among the global geopolitical order, right? So apart from that, I have currently being engaged with Unacademy, India's largest online learning platform, for almost 5 years now, and also a faculty at a lot of offline institutes in New Delhi. As pointed out by Avinash sir, that I have keen interest in constitution and polity and geography specifically, because if you have interest in international relations, you will definitely have an interest in geography. It goes without saying कि जब अगर आपको interest है geography में, तभी आपको geopolitics में interest आएगा, क्योंकि जब तक आपको geopolitics नहीं पता होगा, geography भी नहीं पता होगा, तब तक you can't link all of these things. And one thing that UPSC exam I think requires more than that is interlinking of the topics. And have a considerable experience in teaching for more than 5 years now, and also working as a consultant with Government of India and advisor to Government of UP. So that is about me. Coming back to the topic of geopolitics, guys who are raising hands, I am seeing your requests, but I'll be taking up the questions in the end. I'll give you ample amount of time to ask your questions. Don't worry about that, right? So the geopolitic, this word is coming from this German word called, or basically from the Greek word, evolution in German text also, is G basically meaning earth and land, and politic meaning politics. So as the word clearly says, it is a study of the influence of such factors such as geography, economics, demography of the area on the politic, and especially the foreign policy of a state. This term is very important. This term state is very, very significant and very, very important. Now, the state is more of a recent evolution, this concept of a state. Earlier, you used to have countries, but their geopolitical boundaries or their physical boundaries were not that limited. You used to have empires ruled by some of the famous rulers like Napoleon, Ottoman Empire. So, baad mein, they got disintegrated into different states, right? Like you had the Russian Empire, and then disintegrated into other empires and in other countries. In the more modern terms, agar aap dekhoge, the word geopolitics has actually evolved from the Swedish political scientist Rudolf Jellin. And how did this term came about? It is based on the philosophy of social Darwinism. Now, this might sound a little theoretical for most of you, but it is very important to know the history of geopolitics. Actually, the history of geopolitics is much new. It is much more fresh than what we really think, because earlier it used to be a totally different ball game. So this theory of social Darwinism, what does it really mean? Now, Darwinism, as you know, is the evolution or the theory of the survival of the fittest. जो सबसे ज़्यादा fit है वही survive करेगा. तो ये जो social Darwinism theory है, this is based on the fact that you have a limited space in the world. You have a limited space on Earth, and that space has to be divided among certain entities, which we call so-called as states. Now, those states, of course, have limited set of resources. So ultimately, these states will fight for the resources. And once the states become bigger and bigger, the population grows, the fight gets bigger. And as the fight gets bigger, of course, the political struggle starts again. So this is the theory of social Darwinism, which is based on the fact that there is a limited space for everyone on this planet. And that is why the fittest state will survive. And that is why you have this concept called as some big powers and other regional powers emerging. So this concept emerged from there, social Darwinism, that socially, politically, geopolitically, geographically, who will dominate. So there, this word ka evolution hua. This word, originated from this concept. Geopolitics originated from this concept of social Darwinism by Rudolf Jellin. So this is the more modern accepted theory or modern accepted definition of geopolitics. Is everything clear to everyone? Audible, visible, right? All good, like I do in the classes, right? Cool. But before we begin to more modern evolution of geopolitics, we have to also see a brief history of geopolitics too. कैसे इवॉल्व हुआ है, कहाँ से स्टार्ट हुआ है, तो वो हमें, so it is a very famous quote, कई बार यूज होता है, that you can't predict your future if you don't know your history too well. So it's very much important and pertinent that you know about the history of geopolitics. So it all started in more recently in the conference of Vienna. And this word geopolitics, again, in the past has mostly focused on the concept of conflicts, right? So this has mostly focused on the concept of world conflict. That the theory that I was talking about, the social Darwinism, that geopolitics in the past has focused on world conflict based on the premise that the world contains a limited amount of space, and all countries have just struggled among themselves to get enough to survive. And once you have the surplus, the fight starts to divide that surplus. Who is going to take the surplus? Initially, nobody had surplus. Initially, everybody used to survive on whatever they used to have. Now, once the concept of surplus came in, now the concept came that who can take more? If that country has surplus, that will become more powerful. No, I don't want that country to become more powerful. So I want to take on the surplus. So the concept evolved that geopolitics is based on the concept of surplus, gaining more territory, gaining more power, gaining more significance with respect to the surplus. So there's a very famous quote by former Secretary of State of US, Henry Kissinger, who is known as a geopolitical strategist. He gave the new theory, the modern theory of geopolitics. He said that by geopolitical, I mean an approach that pays attention to the requirements of the equilibrium. So what he basically means that geopolitical strategy should be based on the concept of equilibrium, how countries need to balance their aspirations. Of course, you can't give any country an access to, just go and invade any other country and get, and invade the country and take hold of that country. And for example, in more recent times, you might be knowing about Crimea, that Crimea was annexed by Russia. Crimea was a part of Ukraine. And as per the previous agreement, Ukraine के साथ जो agreement हुआ था, उसमें they have already given back the Crimea to Ukraine after the disintegration of USSR. So that is what it means. So in modern times, geopolitical mostly means being pragmatic also, being political also to your needs, and also seeing the needs of the other countries as well. But we will go into that detail much more later about concept of realpolitik. So if we go to the short history of geopolitics, it all started in Congress of Vienna of 1819. Now this Congress met after the Napoleonic Wars. So after the death of Napoleon, the heads of the state of various European nations, they met in 1819 and wanted to discuss that how should be the evolution, how should be the relations among the state. So the objective of this Congress was to provide a long-term peace plan for Europe by settling critical issues which evolved during the French Revolution and after the Napoleonic Wars. And the goal was not just to simply restore the global world order, but also to decide new boundaries and how to shift this balance of power so that each could remain integrated to the whole system, and at the same time how the new system will evolve and look like. So this is the original picture from the Congress that took place in Vienna, and how the global peace should be maintained. So this was the first beginning of the so-called concept of geopolitics, how the global world and global order should be shaped like. Then, of course, came the European imperialism. We are also, a witness of this, the expansionist powers of Europe, based on the premise of naval power, expansionist policies, going to expand their colonies. India being a colony, Australia being a colony, Canada, New Zealand, Africa. So ये था आपका concept of European nationalism, which emerged in the 19th century, where European powers like French, Danish, Danes, Dutch, Spain, all of these countries went and wanted to expand their reach based on the same premise. जितना ज़्यादा land, जितना ज़्यादा resources आप लोग ले सकते हो. The same theory of social Darwinism. As much land you can absorb, as much resources you can absorb, take control of that area. So this was the European nationalism and led to a lot of wars. You might have read, a lot of you might have read in modern Indian history about these wars that took place, the Anglo-French War, the various rivalries that took place, especially to control this region of the Indian Ocean and the waters of the Atlantic. Because ultimately, there were going to be only a few set of limited powers who were going to dominate and control the entire world. Now, next is the concept of the Great Game. Now, what is this Great Game? Now, Great Game was basically a geopolitical strategy which was employed by Russia and Britain. So Russia on the one side on here and Britain on the other side, they played this game of balancing their geostrategic aspirations in the entire, especially in the Asian region. So they never accepted this, but they only denied it till the end. And whenever they wanted to take over, for example, Afghanistan is a clear example of the Great Game evolving due to the Russian interest and then the US interest in Afghanistan, and then ultimately leading to the evolution of Taliban. So Taliban actually is a result of the US and the Russian conflict in Afghanistan. So it was basically the Soviets, who were initially in Afghanistan, and they played this Great Game, especially in the Middle East. So Middle East and Asia has been a witness to the Great Game of Russia and Britain and other powers, especially the US later on, which emerged to, which led to the emergence of the recent geopolitical struggle that we are seeing. Most of it, especially the neo cases of or the neo terrorism that we are seeing right now, is mostly because of the after effects of the Great Game. So whenever these these powers went into local territories, the local, of course, always rebelled, and they were hostile to any claim these countries would want over these areas. So as you know, that Taliban, basically is a tribal group who have a proper hierarchy and structure, and they resisted the invasion by the Soviets and of course later on by the US. So they were given these arms and weapons and the money by the US to fight off the Soviet invasion. So this is basically a result of the Great Game. So this happened for quite some time now. Then led to the and went on till almost till Cold War era, and then eventually leading to the disintegration of the USSR. Now this person is very important. This person is very significant for the what we have right now as the geopolitical struggle. His name is Alexander T. Mahan. So Mahan was a very able a naval admiral, and the dominance of US Navy is because of him. He gave the theory of naval or maritime dominance. So it was Alexander Mahan, this person. He wrote this treatise, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. He has been, he played a very significant role in devising on why the countries who will dominate in the future will be driven by naval power. So यूएस की पूरी जो नेवी आज के टाइम में डोमिनेट करती है, उसका पूरा का पूरा सिग्निफिकेंस अगर आप देखोगे is going to just this one person, Alexander Mahan. And he's a very revered figure in the terms of geopolitics and geostrategy. So his main idea was that every country who will become a superpower in the future will be a naval power. And that is why then later on you see, countries like France or countries like Britain, they had very, very powerful navies. In fact, you people might have also read in modern history, I'm reiterating it again, that one of the reasons why Britain or the East India Company was able to establish very significantly in India was because of their very powerful navy. And they were only scared of only one power, that was the French Navy, because you deploy and all of these commanders were there. So they were very able naval administrators. So the British were only scared of just one power at that time. Initially, it was all the Spaniard as well, but mostly later on at time, it was only the French. Later on, Alexander Mahan's theory was very, very significant for the evolution of the US Navy and the conquest of the US Navy. Then, of course, later on, we had the clash of geopolitics, the global clash of geopolitics. That is resulting in world wars. So World War I, World War II. So of course, I'll not be going into much in details of world wars, but that is more like a topic of world history rather than geopolitics. But in sum, if you want to summarize about geopolitics, world wars were considered as an overreach of aspirations of geopolitics, because every country over here wanted to overstep their territories. Later on, you'll understand a very significant theory came in afterward, this world wars, which totally redefined geopolitics. Because abhi tak agar aap dekhoge, all these countries, why they went into world war was a clear cut, in simple terms, was just a simple example of countries going beyond their territories to acquire power or territories. So the neighboring areas hai, unko chhod ke when you want to breach that area and you want to go and beyond these areas, that will not really result in a long-term benefit. That was one of the biggest learning that these countries took from the world wars. So world wars was a classic case of clash of geopolitics. Of course, there were central powers and allied powers, at different ends. And of course, led to the modern state and modern countries like Germany and all of these states. Then this guy comes in, Nicholas Speakman. He redefines the global geopolitics. He redefines the entire theory of geopolitics. He comes up with this theory of rimland. Now you will see why India and other these countries around will become very, very significant. Now he combines two theories, and he combines the theory of geopolitical dominance. He talks about how these countries lying on the rim matlab at the edge, at the brink, they are more important than the countries which are lying in the interior or the heartland. So his theory is called as the rimland theory. So Nicholas Speakman argued that the land around the heartland was the most important for the world political power. So heartland mein agar aap dekhoge, if you try and shape the Asian, trace the map of Asia, you'll figure out that why countries like India, Saudi Arabia, Middle East, Southeast Asian nations are more important than countries like Russia and Europe. Because these countries lie at the border of land and sea. And these countries are called as the rimland countries. So Nicholas Speakman said that whosoever controls the rimland will be able to dominate the heartland. And once you dominate the heartland, of course, then you become a major superpower in the world. So that was Nicholas Speakman, redefining the global geopolitics altogether after this. Then came the Cold War era, again reshaping the entire world. Then you had these forces which were led by NATO, so North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was basically a strategic and a military alliance led by US and European powers, especially against at that time was USSR. So you had the Warsaw Pact and other allies of the Soviet Union fighting for the battle, but India clearly remained non-aligned. So as you can see from the map over here, that India is lying in the gray portion. India was totally non-aligned, not shifting either towards the side of the US or shifting to the side of Russia or USSR at that time. And similarly, there were a lot of other countries led by, like by Egypt, Yugoslavia, who were a part of the non-alignment movement, participated in this. And we never wanted to align ourselves too much with either of the powers, whether it's the Western-backed, the US alliance, or the Eastern-backed, the Soviet alliance. So Cold War was one period which continued till the disintegration of the USSR into the present states of Russia and the Balkan states and other countries that eventually evolved in the European era or the European period. Now, this geopolitics has actually transformed into realpolitik. Now, this word has been used very significantly in recent times. The concept is called as realpolitik. Now, what is this realpolitik? Realpolitik, as the word suggests, comes from the German word realistic, or practical, or actual. And of course, politics is politic. The word is coming from there. So this is a diplomacy or a strategy which is based on the fact that you should work according to the present circumstances and the aligning factors, rather than ideologies and theories. So realpolitics is based on the concept that you will have to align your foreign policies, you will have to align your strategy, you'll have to align your geographical interest based on practical consideration, that whether you share a border with the country or how far you can go into the territory of other country. So it is based primarily on consideration of the given circumstances and factors, rather than explicit ideological notions or moral or ethical premises. Now, India has been an active player of realpolitik. If we talk about India, India's role in realpolitik, India's role has been underrated. In fact, a lot of times India has not been given this much of that much of credit, that how India was able to align itself in the middle, fighting it out with other countries. You had one side led by US forces, you had one side led by USSR, and we were beautifully able to align them and balance them together. So India's realpolitik, or how we carried out this realpolitics, has actually been underrated, and we have not been given that much of credit. Our policymakers and our foreign experts, strategists, have never been given that much of credit that should have been given. So just to give you a few example of the realpolitik situation where India has navigated the situation beautifully. So if you generally see, India's approach to the global order has been grounded in the principles of pragmatism and realpolitik. We have already stood by the concept that geopolitics and geostrategy aside, we will always align our foreign interest or international interest based on domestic interest, and that is based on pragmatism and the needs of the country. For example, if you just to give you a brief example about that, for example, we just talked about non-aligned movement. So non-aligned movement was a classic example of how India tried to balance its geopolitics with realpolitics. So India, as you know, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, former Prime Minister, was the founding member of the non-aligned movement, which was a grouping of countries that were not formally aligned either with the US or the Soviet Union during the Cold War era. Now, later on in 1965, we had a war with Pakistan. We again had a war with Pakistan in 1971. You will not, a lot of you might not be aware that India at that time even managed to secure intelligence from Israeli experts and even weapons in the 1971 war, even though US, which is one of the biggest allies of Israel, was siding with Pakistan at that time. So US sided with Pakistan at that time, and Israel, being a very important ally of US, still sided with India. So it is to the beauty of the diplomacy of India, or the realpolitik played by India at that time, that we were able to balance this as well. Similarly, India has been, since the time of the Arab conquest or the Middle Eastern wars that has been taking place, India has been able to beautifully navigate the politics of Middle East, and very smartly too at the same time. Even managing to import arms, oil, natural gas, energy diplomacy, security diplomacy among the mutually hostile states. You have, for example, if I want to give you a brief idea about this, Let me just use a screen over here. Let's say if this is India, and if we talk about this country as Saudi Arabia, you have Yemen at this side, you have Oman on this side, and then of course this is the Persian Gulf, dominated by Iran on this side, and we have a sandwich state in between called as Iraq. Don't go by the scale of the diagram, of course, because it's a little difficult to draw in this because it responds a little slowly. And then you have a country, our neighbor Pakistan over here. And बीच में हमारा एक neighbor फंसा हुआ है, that is our Afghanistan, जो बेचारा एक landlocked country होने की वजह से कुछ ज़्यादा यहाँ पे it's unable to do a lot of things. Now India has been able to balance this geopolitics among these entire nations over the period of years. If we talk about Saudi Arabia and Iran, the two biggest rivals in Middle East, totally different end of the spectrum. One side you have dominance of the Sunni, the global leader of Sunnis in the world, and then you have Iran, the global head of Shia in the world. But as you might be aware, that the real power struggle is not about who is dominating which sect. It's actually the dominance of, again, the geopolitics of the region demands that they're going to be only one leader, one leader of the entire region. So either it's going to be Saudi Arabia or either it's going to be Iran. So the real battle or the real issue is not whether they are supporting Sunni or Shia. The real game is about who is going to dominate the Middle East. Similarly, for India, the real battle in this region is not about whether it's India or whether it's the countries like Pakistan, or whether it's country like China, or whether it's country like other countries of the Southeast Asian nation. The real issue is who is going to dominate in the Indian Ocean region, or this so-called sub-region, or the sub-region of South Asia. So there are only two powers at this time right now. You have China and you have India. So more commonly as referred to as the dragon versus the elephant. This is a battle of the elephant versus the dragon. Now the real question lies in the changing geopolitical scenario, because we are talking about the evolving global geopolitics. What was there in the previous times and what has evolved in the present times is this: that China has now emerged from being a colony and coming from a period or a region where they literally were at the same place. So when India and became independent, both India and China were at the same GDP level. And it is to the credit of whatsoever you can say for China that they have gone so far ahead that literally they can tackle any country in the world right now. And but during the period of 40s to 50s to 60s, India's growth and the growth of China was almost same. So the real struggle in this part of the world is, in the present geopolitics, is who is going to dominate the South Asian region or the Asian region, is whether the dragon, the Chinese dragon, or the elephant of India can coexist together. The other hand, on the Western side, is the balance going to be whether the Saudi Arabians can coexist with Iran, and when they can't, what they do is go for a proxy war. जब वो दोनों खुद नहीं कर पाते कुछ चीजें, तो what they do is they go for a proxy war. Proxy war meaning that they will never fight a war among themselves. They will decide countries who are going to fight the war for them. So that is why you have this global battle going on in the Middle East. So Middle East has always been the hotbed of these conflicts. So just to give you another perspective on this Middle East and the involvement of countries in this region, let me use again a screen to explain this. So in Middle East, if I draw a chart of the geopolitical alignment right now, let's take the example of two major powers. You have US on one side, you have Russia on one side, and then of course you have the Chinese dragon in middle. So China is always going to be in the middle. Now, you see that there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies in global diplomacy. Okay? ऐसा कभी नहीं होगा कि कोई permanent friend है, कोई permanent enemy है. They keep on changing over the period of time. Classic example is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, from being the closest ally of US, has now gone towards Russia, especially after the Jamal Khashoggi case, the journalist who was murdered in Turkey. Now, Turkey is aligned to US for its own interest. Now, Russia, as you know, so US and Russia has always been the opposite, polar opposites. So that is why during those periods, during the Cold War era, we used to call it as a bipolar world. दो ही poles थे, एक US था और एक Russia था. Now this bipolar world has evolved into a multipolar world right now. Because you have emergence of countries like China, you have emergence of countries like India, you have emergence of countries like Japan, South Korea, North Germany, one of the most stable European power. These countries have redefined global geopolitics. Earlier, it used to be only Russia and US, and then, of course, later on, China came in. So now the present scenario of geopolitical alignment stands like this. That now with Russia, you have Saudi Arabia, which earlier used to be an ally of US. And now Russia is, of course, with Iran. Iran being on the other hand of Saudi Arabia. Iran and Russia support Syria, or the Syrian government. And then Syria has issues with Turkey. They have issues with Iran. US, very close ally of Israel. Israel, their ally. Russia, totally opposite of Israel. So you see that these countries keep on flipping, and they have been flipping their sides based on their interest. But majorly, these countries have always aligned according to the interest either with US or with Russia at a certain point of time. But as I told you before as well, there are no permanent enemies, there are no permanent friends. And more so, where it lies or falls very correctly for India as well, because Shashi Tharoor in one of his books writes that it's very difficult to have a very big neighbor. It's very, very difficult to have a big neighbor. Nobody likes a big neighbor. जैसे हमारे यहाँ होता है ना कि शर्मा जी और उनके शर्मा जी कोई सामान ले ले तो हमें बड़ी jealousy हो जाती है. So nobody likes a very big or a very successful neighbor. Same is the case with India. So India is actually in a very tough neighborhood. India's neighborhood is not so easy to survive. So it is to the credit of the geopolitics or the foreign policy makers of India that we have been able to navigate it very easily. Rather, not with too much of difficulty, because India's neighborhood is very challenging. We have so many issues to deal with on the eastern side, on the western side, and then on the northern side, China, and then the southern side, you have the Indian Ocean region. So very vast area, and has always been a prized possession for the global empires. India has always been a prized possession for the global empires. But coming back to the topic again, so India and the concept of realpolitik, we have been beautifully able to navigate these issues of Middle East. And when the Soviet Union fell, it gave an opportunity for India to reinvent its relationships. So India historically has always been a close ally or in close relationship with Russia, especially after the 1971 war. Because in 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, or what we call as the most famous, the Pakistan War that we had for liberation of Bangladesh, it was actually the US or the Britain where siding with Pakistan, and it was Russia who actually came in and helped India. So as you know that there's a very famous port of Russia called as Vladivostok port. So the Russians sent their navy, the fleet of navy from Vladivostok port to support India, to counter the port or the fleet coming in from US to support Pakistan. So the fall of the Soviet Union gave an opportunity for India to reinvent its relationship, especially with Russia and other countries as well. And during that time, after that period, however India saw fit, we have aligned our political, strategic, and economic interest ke basis by our geopolitical interest. For example, we are very close allies of US right now. We are very close. We are probably the closest we have ever been to US, but that does not mean that we will take whatever the US will say. For example, again, WTO. Now, in WTO, in World Trade Organization, US and India are always counter. they never align on the same interest, because US has other interests, especially with respect to agriculture. We have different interests with respect to agriculture. We have issues of food security of farmers. We have issues of agriculture being the dominant sector of our economy. So we can't really let foreign powers dominate in this region. Similarly, that culminating into the concept of RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, where we did not agree to be a part of RCEP because we have other areas also to look in. Economy is the most important factor for geopolitics, because ultimately it's all about resources. It goes back to resources, who has the maximum resources. But that does not mean that for our economy we will be sacrificing the interest of our farmers or the domestic economy for integrating our economy with the global world order. So just a few examples of how India has used more of a pragmatic approach in dealing with the geopolitical struggle that has been taking place in the entire world. Now, once after the Soviet Union fell, India's relations with the US have significantly improved. With even Donald Trump's administration, recent national security strategy referring to India as a global and a strategic and a very important defense partner. So what I referred to as earlier, that India is probably having the best time in terms of geopolitics. And that has significantly taken us to another level during the times of COVID-19. The role that India has played, which we'll discuss a little later in the lecture today, on how India's role in COVID-19 diplomacy has really shaped the way the world sees India. It was already very significant, but it has gone multifold up, or increased multifold in according to what India has done with respect to the COVID-19 diplomacy. But moving ahead, the alignment of US interest and the Russian interest. So this is the map of Indian Ocean region, and this talks about the power balance in the Indian Ocean region. As I gave you an idea about earlier when I drew a map about the global or the struggle happening in the Middle East. So you have the US bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar. Saudi Arabia earlier used to be a major center for US, but no longer. So now it's more of Russia now. Now India wants to dominate in this region of Indian Ocean region, but China has other interest. So China, through the South China Sea over here, wants to come here and dominate in this region. So that is why if you see Gwadar Port, the ending point of China-Pakistan economic corridor, one of their major points. Then Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka, one of their major points. Sittwe Port in Myanmar. Now, there's a very important project that India has undertaken to connect the entire northeast of India with the Southeast Asian region, that is called as the Kaladan multimodal project, connecting India's West Bengal to Myanmar on the Sittwe Port, and then through the Kaladan River, it will connect India's northeast. So instead of going through the Siliguri corridor or the Chicken's Neck, which takes a lot of time and is from logistically it is a nightmare. It's better and faster and convenient to go from West Bengal via sea to sea route to Myanmar, and then from the land route there to the northeast, rather than going from all the way through curving through the loops from the Chicken's Neck or the Siliguri corridor. So that same Sittwe Port is also a docking station for the PLA Navy, the Chinese Navy. That is a cause of concern for India. So India wants to dominate in the Indian Ocean region. Of course, this is our own backyard that we consider, but China also historically considers it as their own backyard. China, according to the historical maps, consider that ये उनका area है, ये इसके पहले भी इनका area था, ये भी पूरा इनका area है. Because as you know that recently the struggle is going on around the LAC and Ladakh issue is going on. China is trying to assert itself. Not just in that region. China is asserting itself in Vietnam also. China is asserting itself in South China Sea also. It is asserting itself in the Pacific also. So China has gone full throttle right now. They don't really care about what the other countries are thinking. Before COVID happened, they had huge investments in Africa. Huge investments in Africa. They were almost... so China is right now behaving like what your European powers used to behave during the colonialism period. So that is why what China is doing right now, what we commonly refer to as the neo-colonialism, or it is colonialism 2.0. So what China is doing basically right now is they have the huge economic resources. Those economic resources, the money it has, tries to give out loan to countries, and when eventually these countries, when they can't pay out the loans to China, they almost become the masters to the Chinese master. They dance to the tune of the Chinese master or the dragon. So Africa before COVID-19 was totally going towards the Chinese order, but now due to COVID, this alignment has also changed. A lot of projects in Africa has been cancelled. A lot of projects in Southeast Asia of Chinese have been cancelled. In fact, you might have also read in news that a lot of Japanese companies are being pulled out by Japan, and the country, the Japanese government is itself paying to pull them out from China after the Wuhan or the COVID-19 virus came out from there, to shift its production or activities to other countries, other parts of the world. So the challenge right now is, if we talk about the global geopolitical diplomacy, or the evolving geostrategic alliance or geostrategic, how it is evolving, is balancing of four major powers now. So you have USA on one side, you have Russia on one side. In the middle, you have India. And where do you fit in China in all of this? So the classic theory has always been that once the US becomes weak, that space which is created by weakening of the US will be filled up by China. But US is not yet ready to give up that space, especially when you see Donald Trump coming out with full throttle and saying that we are going full out against all the nations. Whether you see his efforts with respect to Israel, declaring Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, even though it's a disputed territory between Palestine and Israel, or whether going out to talk to Kim Jong-un of North Korea to resolve the Korean Peninsula crisis, or even mediating, or even asking to mediate in the issue of Kashmir with India and Pakistan. So US अभी ready नहीं है अपना space give up करने के लिए. The classic understanding has always been कि जब US weak हो जाएगा, US कमजोर हो जाएगा, तो जो वो space है, that will probably be filled by China, considering the scale of military and the scale of economic power that they have. So US, from what it seems like, is not yet ready to give up that space. So where do we fit in these powers lies the challenge. So India now has in most of the cases has to do this so-called balancing act. That how do you balance the interest? For example, now we have gone very much closer to US, but that does not mean that we discount the Russians, because Russians have always historically helped us out. Russia has always been our historical partner, whether we talk about our Navy, whether we talk about the Sukhois that we have, whether we talk about the more recently S-400 missiles. Russia has been a dependable partner for India. चाहे वो डिफेंस की बात कर लो, चाहे आप किसी भी एस्पेक्ट की बात कर लो, we can't really discount the role of Russia. But at the same time, we also have to appreciate the fact that the US is trying to fit in India to its category of an ally, even though we are not technically an ally of US, but nevertheless, we are not less than that. So India has to carefully balance these aspirations of global powers like the US and the Russia, and fit in China somewhere in between, so that the dragon and the elephant, whether they can coexist. There was a recent statement made by the Chinese Foreign Ministry when this whole issue of Ladakh came in. So that was a statement made by the Chinese Foreign Ministry that both the dragon and the elephant can coexist. There is no need of having a tussle in this region. But anyway, so as I was talking about US, as you know that with US and with the efforts of the former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh and the Bush administration and then the Obama administration, we were able to sign a very significant deal called as the Historic 123 Agreement in 2008 that allowed India to import nuclear fuel, despite we being not a signatory of NPT, the non-proliferation treaty, or even not being a member of NSG. Generally, it is not allowed for other countries to import. But this agreement gave us a kind of waiver. And this was to the credit of the US and the special relationship and bond that we had developed with the US. Similarly, we have built a very strong foundation, a very strong relationship with Japan, which is a very significant ally of US. And more recently, again, there have been talks about the revival of so-called a grouping called as the Quad, which involves India, US, Japan, and Australia. And this is again to counter China in the region, which of course does not make China really happy, but then nevertheless, so there are talks about the revival of this so-called Quad alliance. Because what we again are doing is trying to balance our interest in this region, and they are trying to balance their interest in this region. Recently, India, changed the definition of Indo-Pacific. Earlier, Indo-Pacific used to exist from here. Now, India says that as per our official understanding, Indo-Pacific will lie from Africa to entire this region. This, of course, was not welcomed by China, because China thinks that India is being very aggressive, but it is only to counter what China is doing in the entire region. For example, the South China Sea, if you talk about South China Sea over here, what they're trying to do is not hidden. They're trying to build in artificial islands to claim the territory, because ultimately it goes back again, social Darwinism. Who wants to extract the maximum resource, whether it's oil, whether it's minerals, or whether it's energy, everything. So South China Sea dominance by China is to acquire the rich natural resources lying in this region. Again, rich natural resources lying in the Indian Ocean region. China wants to dominate there, and of course connect to Europe and Africa. So the dominance is about which country can control the maximum amount of resources. So going by that logic, as you know, China has come up with this very ambitious project called as One Belt, One Road Initiative, or the Maritime Silk Route, where they are using these historical path or tracks, which was led to the gateway or connection of Europe with Asia at that time. So this is the land route, through which they are building roads and highways, and they're building railways, even to an extent that the longest railway from Urumqi in China almost connects to now even London. It's the longest rail train journey now which has been undertaken. So the Chinese are building there. The Chinese are even building rail route to Nepal, which is a cause of concern for India. They are building rail projects in Myanmar. So what they're trying to do is encircle India from the land side also, and to encircle India from the water side also, from the maritime Silk Route. So now what China is doing is to encircle India. What India wants to do is encircle China by building good relation with countries around their neighbors. So that is why India came up with this policy of neighborhood first. So India also came up with this policy of neighborhood first. That stands the most important policy for Indian foreign policy, the most important aspect of our Indian foreign policy right now, that we will always give preference to policies which favor, or projects which favor, our neighborhood. So we want to develop very good relations with our neighbor, so that we won't give a chance for China to really counterbalance or really counter or encircle India in this region. So that is why we're trying to build relations with countries like Vietnam. We're trying to build relations with countries like Thailand. We're trying to build relations with countries like Myanmar. Historically, we have never really, paid significance or paid really too much of interest in these countries, even though we used to have very good relations with them from the times of Cholas or Pandyas, or in ancient Indian period, where the entire Cholas had conquered the South Asian region. But over the more modern course of time, we never really paid so much of attention. Now we are paying attention because of China. At the same time, we are paying attention to countries like Middle East. So that is why now we have a policy of look west and act east. We want to act on our projects which are lying in the east, and we want to look towards the west. That is why, especially after Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014, he has specifically designated a desk to look into the interest of India in West Asia. That is to the credit to him and his policymakers, that we have good relations with now with Saudi Arabia, good relations with countries like UAE, or mostly Arab states, even to an extent that when India revoked Article 370, there was not much of a concern raised by the Islamic nations. That is to the credit of foreign policy makers of India, that we have taken into confidence these countries, which were historically the allies of Pakistan. So that is the geopolitical shift that is taking place. Earlier, countries like Turkey, countries like Saudi Arabia, all of these Islamic nations used to side with Pakistan on any issue, whether it was an internal matter of Kashmir or any issue of India-Pakistan, they will always align with Pakistan, but that is not the case right now. Now they are going towards what we again call as realpolitik. It is based on pragmatism. It is based on practicality, whether it is better to be with India or whether it is better to be with Pakistan, considering future interest. Now, as most of the nations know, that Pakistan is a failed state, almost a failed state. So it is not wise to be aligned with Pakistan. So even the Islamic countries going against their ideological nations are aligning with India because they see India as the future economic power. We are already an economic powerhouse. So everybody wants to share of in the pie of the Indian economy. So that is what the real politic has come in, and how the global diplomacy has changed over the period of time. That even historically, which countries which were with Pakistan or used to take side with Pakistan are now aligning with India. Similarly, if we talk about the relation of India with Japan, US, Australia, this is totally, as I told you, is an effort of India to counter China in this region, and even to an extent that now we have been from quite some time talking about giving India a permanent seat in UN Security Council. So we have been talking about UN reforms, because what was the global order during 1945 has totally changed in what it is right now, 2020. It has totally transformed. The powers that used to exist at that time were only US and Russia. Now it is from a bipolar world, it has become a multipolar world. You have countries like India, you have countries like Japan, you have countries like South Africa in the African region. You have countries like Brazil in the Latin American region. These are the countries which have a huge potential, and they have transformed the entire continent. So these countries deserve a place in permanent seat at the UN Security Council. And even if we talk about the real politics of India, which we're discussing right now, and how it has evolved over a period of time, the geopolitics has evolved. It is not that if Israel is a very close ally of US, or if US is a very close ally of a particular A, B, C or country, we will align with them in every matter. That is what is called as dehyphenation. The classic term that is used in global diplomacy is called as dehyphenation. We dehyphenate the issues. We break down the issues as being separate. For example, if we have to talk with Israel, we talk with Israel with respect to security, with respect to arms, with respect to agriculture, with respect to science and technology. But we deal with them totally differently when we are dealing with them with respect to Palestinian issues. For example, even though we are very close to, the Prime Minister Modi is very close to Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, but we did reject the occupation of Jerusalem by Israel, and voted against, in fact, even abstained in voting in favor in the UN resolution that went against the Israel on illegal occupation of territories of Jerusalem, under the UNGA resolution as well. Similarly, in the UN Security Council resolution. So this is a classic signal of India again playing a very pragmatic role, or playing a very pragmatic version of global diplomacy, where even though we have very good relations with a certain country on certain issues, but that does not mean that we will align with them on every issue. And that has been widely respected for India as well. And that is something that we all have to cheer about India, is that has been widely respected as well. Now, there are challenges as well that India has to navigate. For example, by 2050, it is estimated by PricewaterhouseCoopers that India will become the third largest economy, and probably by 2050 will become even second largest. That remains to be seen right now, especially in the times of COVID-19, and how that will take shape. Because, as you know, during COVID-19, the entire scenario has changed. The economy is in trouble spot. Not even a trouble spot, it's in recession. A lot of companies are being shut down, the businesses are moving out, the migrants labor are moving out of the places where they have been working. It's very difficult to kickstart the economy from what it was in the pre-COVID times. So challenge which remain for India and other countries as well, firstly, is a nationalistic America. Now, why nationalistic America? Because America under Trump is going towards what we call as a close or protectionist America. Today itself, there was a statement by US White House that probably they're going to cancel the H-1B visas. So they are moving from a version of what we call as globalism or globalization to protectionism. That is one of the first challenges that India and other countries have to navigate. That how do you balance your interest when the world was interconnected at one time, and now it is going towards a version of protectionism, even to an extent when you see when even Prime Minister Modi under Atmanirbhar Bharat is talking about the same thing, that instead of depending on other countries for import, why should not we build that in India? Of course, that's going to boost our Make in India initiative, but how much of an effort or how much of an effect does it really show in real depends, is something that has to be seen. So a rising China is again a concern. As you see, it's all over. So whatever I'm mentioning over here is all pretty much visible of whatever is happening around. You have a protectionist US which is closing its borders, building wall on Mexico, on the side of Mexico. You have a rising China which is trying to assert itself, especially more after COVID-19 crisis. A divided Europe, especially after Brexit. So the European power, which used to be at its supremacy at the time of the 19th century, is now much more divided than any other part of the world. The Spaniards are fighting with the British, they are fighting with the French are fighting with the Germans. The Europe is much more divided this time. So how do you balance Europe? Whether you balance Europe as one entity or you deal with Europe as different entities, again, rise a challenge for India. And a re-emerging Russia. Especially after the Crimean crisis of 2014, Russian economy, because of the economic sanctions, went in doldrums. And it was a very weak period for Russia. At one time, it used to be the only major power. But now it has trying to re-emerge after that economic crisis, after the European sanctions. So how do you balance the aspirations of Vladimir Putin and his aspiration with respect to the global geopolitical order is something that India again needs to balance. And how do we balance that? There are a lot of evidence for it already. For example, as you know, that we bought the S-400 missiles, even to an objection by US, that they said that they're going to probably apply CAATSA, the Countering American Adversary Through Sanctions Act. But even we got a waiver over there. So that is again an example of what we call as the realpolitik played by India. That despite the fact that we were almost threatened of economic sanctions or sanctions by US for purchasing the most advanced missile system in the world, S-400 by Russia, we were still given waiver. Then Japanese economy has been into trouble because especially the population in Japan is very aged. So they have a very low population of working class people, and their average median age is on the higher side. So it's a normalizing Japan. Then you have an insecure ASEAN region and an even more disturbed Middle East. It was disturbed earlier as well, but now it is even more disturbed, especially after what happened after the cancellation of the Iran nuclear deal or pulling out of Iran nuclear deal by US, killing of General Osmani, and Iran and US going to a brink of war. The other thing that for India is to balance the economy. The economic rebalancing that is taking place, or which has now started, is translated into a political manifestation. And that means a fundamental overhaul of the global architecture. We have seen an example of that in the trade wars, where just because of the interest or the ego clash of two countries like US and China, the entire global economy was in tatters. The entire economy suffered. And after that, we saw COVID-19 coming out, which even further deteriorated the global economy. And multilateralism is on the decline, and is one of the casualties of the multilateralism has been the casualties of that has been the big powers, their power eroding and resulting into more of a multilateral world. So now the alliances are shifting. Overall global considerations and decision making is much less coagulated what it used to be before. So इसमें क्या हो गया अब, क्योंकि there are multiple alliances coming together at the same time. अब ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ एक ही country जो बोलेगी वो करना पड़ेगा. There has to be a sort of consensus with other countries also. So this is significantly happening in the Gulf region and North Africa. For example, Qatar. Qatar always used to be very close to Saudi Arabia, but now Qatar wants good relations with Iran, even though they are poles apart. So you are seeing this multilateral world emerging and the associated challenges emerging from that. So I have listed out a few challenges and scenarios that is yet to be seen, and how will they play out in a post-COVID world. And then probably I can take up a few questions in the end from all of you, and we'll see then how the session goes. So these are some of the possible challenges and scenarios that we are looking forward to in the upcoming years. First, or even upcoming months. For example, first is the election in US. We really don't know after what is happening in US after George Floyd's death and the sort of uprising and revolt that is happening in US. It is a very challenging aspect that whether Donald Trump will win or not, or whether the other, who is going to be the other face of US elections. Because right now we kind of have a good relation with Donald Trump's administration. We kind of understand how he functions. So it is in the interest of India if he comes back, to be honest. Being very honest, it is in the interest of India if he comes back to power, because we have kind of aligned our interest. If somebody else comes into the White House, then probably it's going to be a new realignment for India, because now we will have to accordingly work from scratch, and we'll have to see how we can navigate our relationship. Then the next thing that is happening is the decoupling of the US and Chinese tech sector, the decoupling of the economy, especially at the times of trade wars that I've already talked about. So future में जो tension है between US China, this are going to further increase only. ये कम नहीं होगा. The US China tension will provoke a more explicit clash over national security, influence, and values. Then back home in India, India is going to be modified. Under Prime Minister Modi, the leadership under Prime Minister Modi, he is going to transform how India deals with other countries, on how India does domestically with his policies and especially his diplomacy. So it yet remains to be seen that how India will reshape its strategy with respect to certain countries. Of course, with China, it's pretty much clear that we are going to be assertive. We are going to be very much bold when we are tackling with China. At the same time, we will also be paying attention to that we do not become too exertive or too assertive at that time, because a war is never going to be in interest of either China or India. So a lot of people, a lot of commentators are saying that, oh, probably we are going for a war with China. That is neither in the interest of India nor in the interest of China. What China can basically do right now is just to show that, oh, we have a strength, we can do this and we can do that. But in reality, no country can face a crisis like war-like situation right now, or go for even a war like in present times when the global economy is at the lowest, probably even below after the Great Depression that happened. Now, geopolitical Europe is another challenge. As I told you, it is much more divided, especially after Brexit. There are questions raised about European Union, the Eurozone, and how that will shape up in the future. So how India deals with them remains a challenge again, because whether we deal with them as a single entity as Europe, or whether we deal with individual countries separately, remains to be seen. Then climate change. We can never discount the role of climate change. There are always divided sections with respect to climate change. There are some sections of the society or some sections of the world which are talking about whether climate change is real. Of course, Donald Trump does not believe in climate change. He has pulled out from the Paris Climate Agreement. Similarly, a lot of countries have also pulled out from climate change agreements after seeing US. But this is one of the biggest factors or biggest challenge in the 21st century or the upcoming years, that how do we balance the interest or the economic interest of the countries with respect to challenge, or how the development is a sustainable development. That remains to be seen. Probably COVID has given us some time, COVID-19 has given us some time to think about it and to work on the aspects of how sometimes nature can reset the entire scenario. So we had just one virus to reset the entire global economy. Similarly, can we afford another similar type of a situation where a climate change can bring about another reset? So we really need to think about, all the countries really need to think about whether we can really afford something like climate change and coming back of issues that we are seeing during the COVID-19 scenario. And how do we balance Russia, US, China? That remains to be seen, because sometimes you see Russia coming very close with Donald Trump, Putin, sharing a bonhomie with Donald Trump. At the same time, you also see them at the same time. It's very undecisive sometimes with US and Russia. It's not very clear whether the balance is shifting towards this side or the balance is shifting towards that side. Then comes the guy in the middle is Kim Jong-un, balancing certain equation in the Korean Peninsula, the Korean crisis, and balancing the colonialism 2.0 of China. And last but not the least, there are a lot of talks, a lot of articles, a lot of research that is going on COVID-19. We are talking about, we are living that historical times. We all are actually a witness to a history being created where a virus led to the shift in the global geopolitics, where the earlier alignments have been broken, and what we see right now is the entire world united against one country. This has never been seen probably in earlier years. That is the COVID-19, when entire world is against China. So how China balances that, we are already seeing some of the instances where they're trying to pull their military, or they're trying to pull their navy in certain region, trying to assert their power. How does it progress? That is something yet to be seen. And even in fact, in my book, I have dedicated a special chapter on COVID diplomacy, on how the post-COVID-19 world would look like. And at the same time, I have specially dedicated a chapter on climate change and the effect of climate change, on how global geopolitics have involved with the issues of climate change. So this, ladies and gentlemen, I was something that I wanted to talk about in today's session or the webinar about how the global geopolitics have changed and how they are evolving over a period of times. And I'll be more than happy to take up a few questions now. Okay, so first question is I'm seeing is importance of Nepal from Indian point of view. Very good question, Prasoon, I think. So, Prasoon, with respect to Nepal, as you know that we are seeing issues and concerns with respect to the Lipu Lake border or the Lipu Lake Pass and India constructing a road around that area. So first thing that you have to understand about Nepal, that Nepal always has enjoyed more recently what has happened is, especially after how the monarchy ended in Nepal and they wanted to move towards a democratic country, democracy has really not settled in. They wanted to make a constitution, but that constitution has not really worked out for them, and the constitution has not been really successful. So, and there have been issues with respect to, as you know, in 2015, we kind of let it slip a little by the Madheshi blockade that happened. So, with respect to Nepal, Nepal is a very significant in South Asian geopolitics, if we talk about, especially for India, because they act as a buffer state between China. Between China and India, Nepal is a buffer state. So their role is going to be very, very significant. So it is very, very important for us that we align with Nepal, we work out a situation with Nepal, and we bring Nepal on our side rather than the Chinese side. But also we have to be careful that we always do not give in to their demands. Because what Nepal is doing right now is trying to play the China card. They think that if we bring in China, probably we can get some considerations from India. So that is one thing that we have to be very, very careful. Bhaskar, so I have a question. So it's first thing is that it's definitely doable. I have a lot of friends who have got All India rank 2 and 3 who started at the age of 29 and they got through in first attempt and they got rank 2. So first thing is that to answer your question, that is definitely doable. You just need 1 year of dedicated preparation to clear this exam. Now, one challenge that remains for you is that you're a working professional. So a working professional, the challenge is time management. So time management has to be seen. And so for example, you're working in a public sector bank. So I think Saturdays, Sundays will be off for you. So what you can do quickly is on weekdays, you can take out time around like 4-5 hours for studying, pay special attention to newspapers, daily current affairs, along with managing your static topics. And on weekends, you can, probably, put in around 8 to 9 hours. And yeah, it's definitely doable. Definitely doable. 29. No, see, as long as you have one attempt and 1 year of dedicated preparation time left, it's definitely doable. See, from the Wolf Warrior diplomacy point of view, again, Priyambada, the point is we don't have to give in really into the pressure. The problem is that we don't have to be really emotionally charged up, as I talked about in the session also today, that we have to play what we call as the real politics. We have to really understand that we don't have to look from the geopolitics from immediate benefit point of view. Of course, no geopolitics is free from immediate benefit and long-term benefit. So we have to take a very gauged approach. What is going to be a short-term benefit? What is going to be a medium-term benefit? What is going to be a long-term benefit? The only thing that we have to be very, very careful about that don't fall prey to this wolf politics or the wolf warrior politics or wolf warrior diplomacy. We don't have to fall prey. We have to be, we have to gauge our efforts. We have to do a calculated measurement of the efforts that we are going to take. And most importantly, we have to regain the confidence of our neighborhood, especially countries like Myanmar, Bangladesh, where there have been issues with respect to Rohingyas, or whether there has been issue with respect to Pakistan as well. So even from what we can see right now, even Pakistan is willing to talk. So I think it's a very good time and opportunity for India's, and we should be thankful to COVID-19 for that. That is what something I want to talk about in the end also, and I mentioned that in my book also in the chapter, that it has given a sort of a very higher pedestal for India to build a base upon.